You're live.
Good morning and welcome to the August 19th, 2016 meeting of the DNA Subcommittee. I'm Dr. Adams, and also present are Drs. Bieber, Eastman, and Sozer. We do have a quorum. Dr. Batzer, Buell, and Kidd were unable to attend. You've received a draft agenda for today's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I make a motion.
Second.
Thank you. Motion and second. All in favor indicate by raising the hand. Aye. It's approved. You've also received a draft copy of the minutes from the May 13th, 2016 meeting. Are there any comments or questions related to those minutes? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Second.
Motion and second. All in favor, raise the hand. Okay, moving on to the accreditation and laboratory updates. We have three laboratory updates. The first is Westchester County Department of Labs and Research Division of Forensic Sciences involving their April ASCLD lab accreditation. Any comments or questions about that? As always, representatives from that laboratory are either here or available by phone.
So I have a question that Dr. Buell had.
Okay, then we'll tell.
It's about their quantifier trio validation, if somebody could talk about that.
Hello.
Hi. Is this Bob?
Yep.
Hi, Bob. We're at the subcommittee meeting, and you're on.
Good morning.
So Dr. Easton has a question for you.
Hi, I have a question for you. It was a question from Dr. Buell, who is not here right now, so he sent the question to me. It's about your quantifier trio validation. He was wondering if you could tell us some information on the sensitivity of the kit and how you did the absolute zero analysis.
Yes, this is Elaine Schwartz, the technical leader. We did a study where we looked at over 100 samples that were run with the kit. And we tried to establish a lower limit where we would not amplify because we considered it to be insufficient to get interpretable results. So first we looked at samples that were real-time zero, and we amplified those, and we looked at what type of allelic activity we were seeing, and basically none of the samples produced any allelic activity that were interpretable according to our thresholds in our laboratory. Then we went a little higher than zero. We went up to like 0.0009 nanograms per microliter, and we had established that below that, sample gave a real time of that or below, all the way down to zero. It was considered insufficient for further amplification because the information we were getting in our electropherograms was just too low level to interpret.
What was your limit of detection?
I would have to look at our validation study. Oh, you mean the limit of detection for our CE unit?
No, just the lowest detectable amount of DNA that you were able to for male and for total human.
Oh, well, it goes out to 0.0001 nanograms per microliter.
Okay. So then September of 2015, you did a material modification. What was that?
Oh, that was based on, we had done work with the Trio kit. We were working on our internal validation, and then we received a letter from Life Technologies saying that they modified the kit. It had to do with their IPC. So we had to do some further work since we were almost done with our validation to just show, to test out the sensitivity and the sensitivity of the kit, and to make sure that it was working alongside what we had established with the kit, the way the kit was originally designed. So we kind of followed their material modification that they had published and did the same type of studies.
Was your low end of detection or your absolute zero, was there any change?
No. In fact, I think we did those studies. No, there wasn't any change.
Okay, I think that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there other questions for the Westchester County Lab? Then do I have a motion to issue a binding recommendation to the Commission on Forensic Science to renew the New York State accreditation of the Westchester County Laboratory, Department of Laboratories and Research Division of Forensic Sciences, in the discipline of biology for the time period concurrent with May 25, 2016 to August 31st, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by the uplifted hand. It's unanimous. Thank you, Westchester.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Two other laboratory update matters are with Erie County and the New York State Police. Neither of these will require a vote, therefore information only. Again, personnel are either here or available if you have any questions. We'll begin with Erie County Police Services.
Both Dr. Buell and I have a question on that one.
Okay.
Thank you for accessing the AT&T network. Thank you.
This is the number they provided in that time. Hello, is this Corey?
Miss Corey.
Hi, Corey. This is Shelley. You're on with the subcommittee. They have some questions about your surveillance.
Yes.
Go ahead, Dr. Eastman.
Hi, this is Allison Eastman, and both Dr. Buell and I have a question about your PCR3 protocol, and it's specifically the area that is highlighted in yellow. I assume this is the revised protocol.
Okay, I got it.
I'm having trouble hearing.
Yeah, it's hard to hear.
It's hard to hear. Can you hear me now?
Oh, it sounds like a bad connection. Maybe.
We're,
It's a little
while
static.
you're peeking that, we're going to hang up and call back,
Okay.
and maybe we can get a better connection second time around.
Okay.
Sneaky. Louder.
Ring sounds
Yeah.
better.
Yes, that's Corey.
Ah,
that better?
Not really.
No?
Well, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you.
Okay. On this protocol, I assume this is the revised protocol after the finding?
Yes, it is.
It's a little confusing, the wording. It is the last sentence in that paragraph, which our interpretation is it says the exact opposite of what it should say.
Okay, let's see. I did not write this, but I'm going to read it.
It
This has the volume of reagent blank.
Yes.
Yes.
Why don't you read that out loud?
I'll read it to you.
Okay.
The volume of the reagent blank used for amplification is that amount that is equal to or greater than the largest volume of corresponding evidence sample extract. It should be equal to or less than the largest volume of corresponding evidence sample extract used for amplification.
Right.
Do
We
you
wouldn't
see-
want to use more.
You'd want your reagent blank to be in the most concentrated form in relation to volumes of your samples. So it would be a smaller volume, equal to or less than the smallest volume of sample.
Yeah, so we weren't, so this is what we were doing. We would extract 2 separate tubes with 2 different swabs from the same item, and then we would combine them during microcon. And what the auditor found was that we had to account for 2 blanks, so we would need to put double the amount of reagent blanks to cover because we had double the amount of sample.
Right, so you were pooling 2 reagent blanks into your microcon.
No, we weren't doing that.
Okay, but now you're going
Now we
to.
are. Correct.
And so you're pooling them into your microcon because you pooled, say, 2 swabs, extracts of an extraction sample.
Yes.
So then you're going to concentrate those. And say you have 3 samples. One is 50 microliters, one is 30 microliters, and one is 10 microliters.
Yes.
Your pooled reagent blank would have to be 10 microliters
Correct.
or less. But that's not what this says.
You know, I wonder if that's a carryover from before they did the concentration.
Now, I don't know.
Yeah,
That might be a carryover sentence that needs to now be changed.
I mean, I looked at I thought this was the
Right.
revision.
Yeah,
it should be the greater than or less.
yeah. So they'll change.
Or less
Yeah.
than, yeah.
Okay.
That
Equal
was
to
the
or
miss
less
on our revision.
Equal to or less.
Equal to or less, not greater to or less than. It has to be equal to or less than.
Yeah, equal to or less than the largest.
Right.
Yeah.
That's equal to or less than the smallest volume sample extract.
Yeah. We will put that in.
Maybe they should say after concentration.
Yeah, maybe that.
And after,
Yeah.
because this is for amplification. So, right, that would be after.
Well, maybe what we can do is, I know it's hard when she's talking through a kazoo, but what we can do is kind of maybe, Carrie, if you guys could kind of relook at that and maybe submit your document back to the subcommittee to look at. Again, it's just for informational purposes, but that way we can make sure that everyone's on the same page.
Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds good.
Okay?
Dr. Eastman, did you have another question?
That was the only
Okay.
the only issue with it.
Anyone else? Thank you, Erie County.
Okay, thank you.
The other information piece that we have on this section is with New York State Police related to their expanded surveillance report from their July 2016 ASCLD lab surveillance. Are there any questions for New York State Police? Hearing none, we'll move on to old business. First item on the agenda is the partial match update. And Brian, I believe you will provide that to us.
Sure. So one of the things we do regularly at the DNA subcommittee is just update on the status of the partial match program. So to date, the total names requested is 88. Evaluation could not confirm for 39. The total names released was 48. There's one that's pending a statistical evaluation currently. 46 cases were closed. 2 remain active. There's nobody that's pending a first report. They have to report to us every 6 months what they're doing. In 3 cases, a relative was identified. 2 results in an arrest, and 1 is resulted in a conviction. 1 is still actually in the legal system. It's a bit of a more major case, so it's going to be it's going to take a little bit of time. So the quick executive summary of coming through that is in 3 cases, the partial match program was able to identify an individual. And in one of those cases, it turned out that the individual, through investigation, could have had access. So it was, it was a valid identification of the individual, but it turned out investigatively there was another reason for that sample to be there. And the other 2 cases involved arrest and 1 conviction to date.
Could you tell us more about the 3 so-called partial matches? How partial were they?
I unfortunately can't tell you specifics on that. I know from what I've read in the paper, the one case that is still in litigation is in Suffolk County, where they have an arrest and it's still pending for the conviction process. It's linked to 2 murders that are going through, and it seemed like it was the lab fairly quickly identified that it was a potential relative, but I don't know anything about what the values are that were associated with that case.
And the conviction, how close was the partial match in the 1 conviction?
I don't know off the top of my head.
And
when you say how close, you're talking about the EMR, AKR?
That or the number of alleles shared across the profile?
Yeah, I don't have specifics on that.
Okay. And do you happen to know, Brian, or would someone else in this room know how many pairs of identical twins there are in the New York State CODIS system?
I actually did know that recently. There are a pile of twins, and there are actually a number of triplets as well. So
were all 3, well, most triplets aren't identical. Were these identical triplets?
Identical triplets.
Do you have numerators and denominators?
Off the top of my head, I don't.
Per twins, I think.
How many?
Yeah.
I don't know the exact number, but I believe it was 100.
100 pairs of identical twins,
Right.
Both of whom got in the old-fashioned way into CODIS?
Correct.
And the denominator, how many people in the New York State ENDIS, or the ESDIS, rather?
We are just over 650,000.
600.
I think the number of triplets is 5 or 6, but I think it was a more modest number. But
Yeah, and that's including the CO duplicate samples that we got.
Were any of these partial matches triplets or twins?
No.
No. Were they sibs or parents
No.
or cousins?
I don't know the specifics again at that level. I would have to look.
Mm-hmm. There's a recent paper in, I think it's FSI International. Tim might know, it's the September issue, about 6 very high-profile cases in either Hungary or Romania that have just been solved, if that's the right word, using familial searching, loosely defined. Slightly different than what we're talking about here, but kinship analysis does work at identifying kin.
I don't know, is there anyone else in the room that might know the answers to your questions?
That's why
Fred?
I'm looking around at the wall.
You had the questions about, what was the question that?
I was wondering how many pairs of identical twins are in ESDIS in New York State?
So we had that. It was approximately 100. And the triplets, it's roughly 5. As far as the specifics of the case regarding what's shared, where they were, I don't believe there is.
No one knows
Yeah,
that?
not here. As I said, it's accessible. It's just not right here. Just for a clarification, too, though, there is a distinct difference between partial match and familial searching.
Right.
So just because people look at these meetings and sometimes have come to different conclusions. So the analogy that I use to describe these for the novice is partial matches, walking down the beach. The tide is the DNA search that happens on a regular basis, and as you look down, you see a fish. You pick it up, and great. And if that fish is a good fish, you can move ahead, meaning if it meets your statistical thresholds, you can go ahead and see if it associates. Familial searching is a different, more aggressive process that's independent of the search, where I basically walk over to the shore, I get my wetsuit on, which is an image I will appreciate if you get out of your head as quick as you can, and then get a spear gun, and then I go into the water and I basically hit a clownfish because I'm looking for that orange fish. Familial searching is very targeted. It's a different mechanism and process overall, although I understand what you're saying about the idea of that there's more value and information sometimes in it. But New York, albeit taking the light version or the very modified version, we're taking a version that clearly could be increased and made more theoretically effective, but this is the path that New York has taken, and I am fairly surprised, actually, that it's been as successful as it has, even though it is not as aggressive as other states and other places have done.
Why are you surprised?
I just think with 88 people, I'm surprised that it's already identified, that you've already had 3 cases where you've identified a relative. With just the way we do it, not being more aggressive with it.
I'm not surprised.
See, that's why we keep it on the commission, though.
And I'm not confounding the two concepts, to make it clear for the record. I'm not.
Yeah, but I'm pleasantly surprised, by the way. I'll modify that and say that I'm pleasantly surprised. But as I said, this is manifesting in a way that was really hoped and desired as they were initially putting it in, because this is not the law and order walking into the wedding and bar mitzvah and arresting people because there was a potential partial match. This is all happening silent in the background, and in many of these cases, nothing is happening. So they look, and when they do their investigation, they look, and the police agencies are doing their family trees, and they realize that there was no one that was around at the time, or there wasn't physically there. There is no person arrested, there's no person questioned. It's all done through paper before it even happens, and as I said, that's been really effective.
Yeah, if I could just make one comment further what Brian is saying.
Speak up.
So just a comment, Ray Wickenheiser on behalf of New York State Police. Our mismatch system is only looking at one locus that has a mismatch. Okay, so that to me is a very, not a very stringent search for somebody who may be for kinship. Because typically if you're looking at 13 loci, you would expect to see a quarter of those that would have full mismatch or greater. We're sort of in that ballpark. So the fact we're finding these with just a single locus mismatch, I would tend to go with Brian saying there's certainly, we're really not looking. These are ones that are just coming to us as a matter of our QC. If we were looking, we would be looking more to the neighborhood of 4, potentially, because that's the statistics with respect to a civil. So really not actively looking, and we would expect to see, I mean, to me, just to find this number with this low of stringency, to me,
but that thought experiment, Ray, makes an assumption that crime, however you define it, is randomized throughout the general population, and we know that's not true.
And that's also a fair assumption.
Yeah.
You're right in that.
Yeah. Okay.
So can I just ask a question out of ignorance? So you're doing this on a happenstance, and you're finding you're finding people that have been
potential suspects.
Right, potential suspects, or and that have resulted in convictions, at least a couple of them. And you're doing this kind of in a random way. Has the state ever considered doing this in a more formal way? I think that maybe a while ago is that time to revisit that for the laboratories, and I'm probably overstepping my bounds on this, but you're just pointing out some evidence here, and that is very, you're finding people that have committed crimes, and maybe you have now been able to spend much less time doing an investigation on that crime because of DNA. But there are what Fred just said, there are other ways, other people are doing this in maybe a more, in a different way. Would that ever be considered to go back, from the committee here to say, hey, other people are doing it this way and doing this, does the state want to revisit that?
Right. I think maybe if I can recharacterize what you said and see if you agree with it, please don't let me rephrase.
Sorry, it was random thoughts there.
But you describe it as what we're doing random. I think what I would recharacterize it as is more passive, that we take a more passive approach as opposed to familial, which is aggressive.
Correct.
Using this kind of as a baseline, there's a law science interface that we're always juggling. So clearly, I think the science shows that there's a increased benefit to a more aggressive stance, but in the grand scheme of policy, the legal science interface means that the state and the legislature has to be comfortable with moving in that direction, which I'm not sure we're at a place to do just yet. Obviously, that's something we can consider in the future. And Gina, if I'm misstating anything,
yeah, if you
please.
want to make recommendations and submit them to the commission, then you could do that.
You know, you're welcome to, and that could be independent of the partial match process. What I'd recommend, if you were going to do that, just not to befuddle what this is happening and derail it in a side conversation, is we go through, we make the changes here, and maybe at the next meeting you say, listen, we've all looked at this, and we think,
Yeah, I agree.
we think that we could do more if you want, and if you don't, we're okay with that. You know, but as I said, I would just recommend if you decide to take that path, you just do it separately so this whole process doesn't get derailed with making the necessary corrections and a side debate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Makes a lot of sense.
At our May 13th, 2016 meeting, we considered changes to the partial match policy. This is going to require changes to the regulations that accompany the policy change, which is our next item. That policy match, the partial match policy requires changes to the New York Regulation 9 NYCRR. And Brian, you want to discuss that handout that you gave to all of us?
Yeah, and actually, before I do that, when we look at the policy again, last time you guys looked at the policy and you made some changes to it, and those changes are kind of reflected in the document you have here. As we're going through and making more changes now to the regs, and a lot of it is a cleanup of making language consistent among things, there are some additional changes you could make to the policy which are very minor that I wanted to point out to you that I would potentially recommend we do. And what I can do is, if you just bear with me, I can walk you through them. So if you open up to the partial match policy that you've kind of approved at the last meeting, if you look specifically down to 1C, the first sentence of 1C, I'll give you a second to kind of get there if you need, talks about the expected match ratio, EMR, and or the estimated kinship ratio. Now, one of the cleanups I think would be worthwhile doing is when the FBI initially promulgated its partial match policy, they used the terminology of estimated kinship ratio. They subsequently have changed that to expected kinship ratio. So to be more consistent with the national policy, what I would recommend we do is we change on line 1C, instead of estimated kinship ratio, to expected kinship ratio. And I can, if you take a peek, it's right. Do you have a copy, Allison? I can give it to you if not.
Looking at the old one or the new one?
You're looking at this one here.
Oh, okay.
So I kind of just have a little hand version here because we've been kind of tweaking as we go. And I apologize, it's kind of a little back and forward as we're going. So just with the first thing we'll be looking at is 1C, 1 Charlie, in that first sentence. The first time you see estimated would be changed to expected. And the reason for that change is totally to be consistent with the NDIS policy that exists out there regarding partial match. So what I'll do is I'll outline the other changes quickly and then see if you're good with that. And again, they're very minor. So if you look at 1E as an echo, the second sentence starts with report. Or actually, that on that first line, a report, and then later its second sentence starts with a report. I would recommend changing that to notification to be consistent with the policies that we've made within the change. So just report the notification, which just is more reflective of what we're actually doing, because report kind of implies to someone that there's a document you'll get and you'll kind of look at it, versus a notification, which is, hey, this is what we're happening. So it's kind of a semantic thing.
Which word report are you changing?
So it'll be right over here, both.
Both.
From report to notification.
Okay.
We're almost there. If you look at the bottom where it talks about the revision history, it should just change to May 13th, 2016, because it just has the wrong date on it. It's just a typo. Flipping to page 2, under number 2, the last sentence says, if the criteria is not satisfied, the local CODIS laboratory will notify the division and the convicted offender's name will not be released. that should really be state. So we could, so I think this is something that is, I think was a misstate in it. The state lab is the one that has the responsibility to do that.
Criteria is plural, are not.
If the criteria,
Are not.
Are not satisfied.
yeah, I think so. So here, we've added another change. Thank you.
So you want state versus division?
No, it would be under
Versus
two,
local.
yeah, under two, instead of local, change it to state.
Okay.
And the last thing is just the first change we talked about is if you look at attachment A, it talks about estimated kinship ratio, just changing that again to expected kinship ratio. So I can pass this around so you can kind of see, but this is just being consistent with the endless language. Yeah. So I apologize for the last minute cleanups, but as we change the regs, we look and say, well, if we're fixing this language, it means, it's kind of a yin and yang where one has to be fixed to match the other.
The footnote revision dates, if you change the first one, then will all the others change?
All the others change.
Will that date change now based upon
It'll
anything
be
we're
added.
doing
Yeah.
today?
Yeah, I think
There'll be another add.
we're kind of slow and pedantic in how we put these things on, so all these conversations are discussed in an open session. We'll memorialize it in another letter saying slight other modifications were made to the thing, so we'll have another letter drafted, and I would say a vote just quickly now saying we agree with these changes outlined and discussed at this meeting. There'll be another letter. Both of these letters will then go to the commission along with the modified new policy and the subsequent regs, which we'll talk about next. But I think, do we want to have one vote for the regs and the new policy, or do they need to be separate?
They don't need to be separate.
So if you guys are okay with that, bookmark that, then we can look to the regs. Does that seem okay?
I have a question about
Sure.
the first part, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Is there anything, there is nothing here, Brian, that tells the reader who shall not receive notification? You've only made reference to entity, laboratory, submitting agency who will be notified of a name.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything to protect these names from wandering eyes?
Well, the beginning part of it says you release if the following conditions are satisfied. So it would have to meet one of those conditions that are listed below to be released.
We could weigh in.
I just wanted to note in number 2 of the functional match policy, the last sentence indicates that the criteria is not satisfied, which is above, that we would not release, that the division would not release these numbers.
So essentially, written, not in legalese, but in a modified legalese, what they're saying is that if you meet all these parameters, the name will be released just to these. If you don't meet them, nothing happens. The name doesn't go anywhere.
I think that last sentence does answer your question.
Okay.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, I think we're ready then for a vote on the just most recent policy.
I think we're going to bundle them if you're okay with the policy and the reg. Is that okay, Gina? So,
Okay, well, then we'll move on to the regulation changes.
So in the version that I passed out now, which is the one that's got a staple on the upper corner as opposed to the one that's in the binder, there's two types of revisions that occurred. So anytime the regs, which codify a lot of the law that goes on, if you take a look, the partial match policy is under 6192.3, which if you look in the lower right is page 16. So the specific changes to the partial match policy that now change the regs are now modified in here. So you see it in a track change version, so you can see how those changes are made. Some of those changes are slight, like if you look at the first change where it talks about DNA acceptance standard to DNA operating procedure, or which in the ENDIS operating procedure. This is to make it more consistent with what the ENDIS language is, so it's the first change within that policy. And then there's other things that now make the regulation align with the policy that you just talked about. The reason that you have more regulations then are for just the partial match is anytime the process of doing this, and especially for the uninitiated, is when you guys look at, review, and vote on, this will then be moved to the commission who will review, look at, vote on. Then DCGS will promulgate these, will put them out for open public comment for a period of 45 to 90 days, something like that. And after that, it goes through a process. So like the thing we're starting now, any vote you take today would not take effect till like November or December. It takes a long period of time to go through. So since we were opening the can up, what we tried to do is look at the regulations and see if there's other places where things could be improved. So the improvements in the other part of the regulations are essentially cleanups of language. So if you look at the first one, just to give some examples, 6190.1, under Part 4, it talked about Executive Law 955. That was a typo because it should be 995. So as we went through, I had my staff go through, review it, and say, oh, typo, let's fix that. There's other places where we mention addresses that either we don't have to mention anymore because there's no reason to, or the addresses were incorrect, so if they needed to be there, we need to go not 4 Tower Place where DCGS used to be, but 80 South Swan where they are now.
I think we'll also need to change the most recent changes that we just had in the policy, like on page 77 where we're using the wording estimated versus expected.
Right. Mm-hmm. So we can make that right now, and we can go through and change that. So the basic idea is overall making these two dovetail together, sometimes a bit of an arduous process. So the reason you have more than just the partial match policy and partial match regulations in front of you is there's other places we found areas that could be cleaned up since we're going through this prolonged process. And it goes through you, then the commission, we took the opportunity to do that. So if you have specific questions about anything here, if not, then you can bundle the vote and say that we will have the policy, we vote to approve the policy as modified at this meeting and the regulations as reviewed to support that. And then, as I said, this would then move on to the commission who can then review and possibly also, if they look at it and say there's something, they can kick it back. So there's another step where it might even take longer.
Page 18 also uses the terminology of local laboratory.
I think that one was already changed. The local is okay in the beginning. It's where it says the state CODIS laboratory on the last
Number
line.
3.
Okay. Okay.
So that was already changed. So it's just the expected on page 17.
Oh, okay. I got you.
So this will need to be changed also.
Uh-huh. Okay, much do I...
Any other comments, questions? Do I have a motion then to issue a binding recommendation to the Commission on Forensic Sciences to not only update the regulation of 9 NYCRR and reflecting these proposed changes, but also to change, making those minor modifications to the policy?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Dr. Bieber made the motion. Dr. Eastman seconded. All in favor signify by uplifted hand. It's unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to new business.
If it's okay to address, I did get some correct numbers for Dr. Bieber.
Yeah, we can go back
Can we
and
go back to the original question? I did
Yes.
get some numbers so I can pass them along. Okay. So the number I had said, total number is over 650,000, including the duplicates. It's just at 672,000
In Estes.
in Estes.
Yeah, that's your end value.
And then the
These
total
are convicted offenders.
convicted
You have no
offenders
arrestees.
that are, well, they're convicted offenders under the designated law.
Yeah.
And then also subject samples.
Gotcha.
If you want to just the designated, it's 609.
But there's no arrestees, though.
Right.
No.
So these are all people that have either an offense that's designated by law or have given a sample as a condition of probation or one of the other caveats they have.
Gotcha.
Pursuant to the regulations.
Yeah, exactly. Pursuant to the
And the
regular.
number of triplets, according to the staff, is 2.
Two.
Two
And
trios,
I
two triplet
underestimated
trios.
the twins at was conservative greater than 100, it's actually at 522.
522 pairs of monozygotic twins.
Wow.
Nature or nurture, we won't comment.
And two triplet trios. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to new business. Reporting disclosures. The first item is an email. Brian, I believe you're going to explain.
Right. So what happened is there have been some revisions to the external accrediting body which accredit our DNA laboratories. So in order to be consistent, we wanted to make sure that the laboratories received this notification, which you guys have, and I'm going to kind of explain, and they were clear and understand how things work. So previously, the external accrediting body, you would see constant updates on corrective actions that were out there. Now what they're going to do, which is actually consistent with the other accrediting bodies in everything, is if there's a non-conforming event that's reported, there's an initial report, and then pretty much when it's closed, that's evaluated when there's an on-site evaluation going on. Since there's a dynamic change to how that's happened in the past, what I thought would be appropriate is that, first off, you should know about it. Second off, when you get an initial report, we're going to add an additional level for the New York labs, which is when they get an initial report, they will also we will track that and keep it open, and then they will tell you when it's closed. So the accrediting body, external accrediting body, does not require that. We are going to require that. So you have a period at the end of the sentence because the external accrediting body will evaluate that when they do their site evaluation. Any open corrective actions they'll review when they're on site. But to make sure that for each open one you see a closed one, you'll have that. You will also have the opportunity that if anyone presents a corrective action to you that you want, the subcommittee wants additional information on, you can request that they give you additional updates at any time. So it's not, that doesn't bind you to say, well, we can only know about an opening and closing. If the subcommittee feels that there's a corrective action that's reported to them that they want regular updates or more updates or periodic updates on, the subcommittee will basically tell the laboratory at the time of the initial disclosure, hey, I would like to hear more about this. So I know you're going to tell us when you close, but we want to hear whenever. For the most part, some of these things might be small and innocuous, so the open close is fine. If there's something that's more significant that you want to know about, then you have the option of asking. But it's a change in procedure. Just wanted to make you aware of that procedure, and as you see, the lab directors are also aware of that procedure. That's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Under laboratory disclosures, we have two. Both are for informational purposes only. They don't require a vote. The first is Nassau County Office of the Medical Examiner, Division of Forensic Services. Any questions or comments related to that disclosure? Hearing none, we'll move on to the New York City Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. As always, if you do have questions, we will have representatives here or by phone.
Actually, I do, on the New York City office. This is with the two baseball caps?
Yes.
How did it happen? How did was it a manual entry or?
At this point, it's still very early in our investigation, but it doesn't appear to be a technical error, but more an admin type error.
Could you just identify yourself? I'm sorry.
Sure. Lou Vargas, QA Director for the OCME.
So, in your DNA hits, do you manually enter the information in there, or is it reading barcodes off of?
The information is keyed in.
Oh, it's keyed in. I guess I don't have any more questions.
Sure. Okay. I'm assuming we'll have further information on this in future meeting.
Yes, we have a RCA meeting scheduled for next month, and shortly after that, we'll submit a report to the commission.
Okay.
So kind of reiterating what I just told you before in this situation, so the way it'll happen is this is the initial notification. They will then tell you everything that's happened. So what's kind of happened up to now is there's been lots more information than you've had, so you get updates almost every single meeting, almost about every single corrective action, which sometimes is too much information. So on something like this, they will go through, thoroughly investigate it, and as they close it, they'll say, we've thoroughly investigated it, this is what we found, and you have the opportunity to ask a question and or say, well, we don't agree with that, we would like you to whatever. Does that make sense? But I think it is kind of awkward, and our situation up to this point has been kind of awkward, that people sitting at the table, you ask them a question, like, well, I really can't tell you because we just started looking or we just started doing this. So it makes them feel kind of awkward, as opposed to being in a situation where at the end, thoroughly investigate, know all the situation, can address any of your concerns or questions, and if you feel there's something else, It just happened, yesterday?
Very recent.
Yeah, so, we're very disappointed that the issue that you identified yesterday is not fully resolved. But, it's going to be par for the course as it happens. So you've been drinking from the fire hose with getting a lot of information. So this procedure actually is going to benefit you because now you'll be able to ask more meaningful questions, have more meaningful evaluations, and be able to get the answers that you need and desire. Okay?
Sorry.
The next item on the agenda is executive session. Can I have a motion to go into executive session to discuss matters relating to current investigation or matters that may lead to an appointment, promotion, demotion, discipline, or suspension of a particular person? I'm looking for a motion. Thank you.
I make a motion.
Dr. Sozer. Seconded by Dr. Eastman. All in favor? Signify by the hand. Thank you. Unanimous. At this point, if you're not on the DNA subcommittee, member or staff, I would ask that you leave the room.
You're up and running.
Thank you.
Good to go. At this point, I'd like to go back on the record and report that no action was taken in the executive session. Our next meeting for the DNA subcommittee will be November 4th, 2016, right here in New York City. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I just want to bring something up quickly before we do. I don't know how long the subcommittee has been meeting and how long forensic DNA has taken place in the state of New York, but I think there have probably been a number of significant changes in technology, in kits, and I'd like to ask the laboratories if there are regulations that they're following now that they feel need to be updated, that they should bring those to our attention so that we could evaluate it, because some of those regulations that were implemented a long time ago may not be necessary now because of changes in instrumentation, and this may help them in easing some burdens on processing samples in the lab and free them up to do, other good work that they need to do.
So I can convey that request to both the Biology Technical Working Group and the New York Crime Laboratory directors so they can dispense it to their masses. Thank you.
Okay. Looking for a motion to adjourn. Thank you. Dr. Eastman, second. All in favor? Unanimous? Again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right.